Today, I am going to be continuing with the book, How to Do Life. It is time for the chapter Self-Knowledge and Relationships. And this is the first chapter in the second section, which is titled Relationships in Everyday Life. Khaled Rinpoche begins by saying that we have two veils or obscurations, and that these veils or obscurations, they hide our ultimate essence. They hide our Buddha nature. This is why they're called veils or obscurations. The first one is the veil of emotional conflict. And there are a lot of different names for this one. One is the afflictive states of mind. The Sanskrit word is kleshas, which means poisons of the mind. And basically, they are negative emotions, and they're really unstable, cause a lot of pain and suffering, and they cause us to accumulate a lot of negative karma. The other is the veil of conceptual confusion. Another name for that is duality, separating self from other. Also, you could say that it is the cognitive obscuration, because this is very mental, in a way, intellectual. So they inject a degree of complication, misunderstanding, misinterpretation, misassessment of ourselves, of the situation, of life. They affect our self-knowledge, how we relate to ourselves, how we relate to the world, how we formulate our experience. However, this is not solid, it's impermanent, it's changeable, and as a result, we can change and we can develop greater self-knowledge, responses, and our experiences can improve. And as a result, we can have more appropriate responses, we can have better outcomes, and we can have more ethical conduct. So to continue, our emotions don't just happen. They might seem like they just suddenly arise out of nowhere. And, well, where did that come from? In actuality, they are related to deep-seated beliefs and also deep-seated habitual patterns. These two veils exert themselves and have a tremendous influence on our emotions. And he uses the example of falling in love. And he says that some people feel that this is a choiceless situation. It just happened. There was nothing that they could do about it. But he begs to differ. He says that there are these very strong, overwhelming feelings, but underneath there is the interpretation of the situation, and there's one's experience. And I'm going to add, not everybody falls in love with the same person. If it was something in that person, then wouldn't everybody fall in love with that person? And if it was in you, maybe why don't you fall in love with everybody? You know, it's actually quite specific. I also knew a man whose father, I think, had divorced and remarried 3 different women. And he said to me, my father likes getting married. He just doesn't like being married. This, again, we can fall in love with falling in love or getting married. So it gets pretty complicated when you really look into this in depth. And are you seeing the object of your love as a person or just an object? It's good to take a deep look with clarity of what's going on in our minds. And this is where mindfulness and awareness comes in. He talks about this over and over and over, to get to know yourself, make friends with yourself, see how your mind operates, get to know your emotions. And from this, we can develop freedom from our emotions. So he goes on to say that frequently our emotions are used in a strategic manner, that there's a strategy. We feel certain ways and behave certain ways to elicit a response and gain certain results. It may be subtle, almost unconscious, he says, perhaps subconscious. But he says usually, quote, I love you, unquote, comes with the expectation of I love you coming back. And if it doesn't come back, eventually the I love you gets dropped. He tells a story of this couple where the one wants to go to the theater and the other doesn't. And the one that doesn't starts an argument and then they make up, but the end result is that they stay home. This is using your emotions strategically to accomplish a particular goal that you have. And the problem with this, besides it's harmful to the relationship, you haven't solved anything. It's still an uneasy relationship, and this unease will bubble up later and continue to taint the relationship. Then he brings in the idea of karma. If we look into it, a lot of these emotions create negative karma, and karma can be looked at as cause and effect, seed and fruit. So when we behave in a way that is motivated by self-interest, we're planting seeds that can lead to suffering in the future. However, if we can become better at expressing our emotions, understanding our emotions, we can become progressively more wholesome, more constructive, less destructive and manipulative in relation to ourselves and others. This is a very important point, that we can change, we can learn. When we apply mindfulness and awareness, we can begin to see resentment, jealousy, a desire to control, all kinds of other negative things that cast shade on the feeling of love. We can see little by little how it harms others and harms ourselves. And with this insight, we can change. To a certain extent, the change comes naturally because we're just seeing more clearly. We can deconstruct our thoughts, our concepts, our way of expressing our emotions. We start seeing subtle beliefs and opinions, and we start seeing them as opinions and beliefs rather than being solid. So this helps us move towards a wholesome behavior, motivation, and outcome, and away from unhelpful, unhealthy ones. So it's very, very important for us to examine our motivation. It's actually good to occasionally just do some examination of ourselves when things have gotten to kind of a painful point in a relationship. After things have calmed down, then take some time and look more clearly at what happened, why it happened, and perhaps how you could have behaved differently. By doing so, we can be freed from the bondage of samsara. We can actually be liberated. Quote, both of these two processes, one of liberation and the other of bondage to the samsaric condition, are determined by how one goes about working with emotions, emotional conflict, and conceptual confusions. Now, looking deeper into emotions, he says that thoughts and emotions are not two different things. We're talking about interdependence here. They are closely connected. He doesn't use the term monkey mind, but this internal dialogue that we have. And frequently it is referred to as monkey mind because it's always jumping around like a monkey in a cage. And if we look at it closely, we will see that not only is this monkey mind jumping around, but it's a soap opera, and it's reruns of a soap opera. We've been here before. We're very familiar with it. We like it. We can't let it go. It's important. And the thing is that this inner dialogue influences us. He compares it to a song that we keep playing inside our heads. And by doing this, we solidify and fixate on the emotions. And he said it's extremely helpful to take a break, apply mindfulness and awareness, and then examine. That this shines a light on what's happening. We can start seeing these emotions as a process, that they're fluid. They come and they go, they change. And with this, then the idea of choice comes into play, that we start realizing that choice is involved here. We're not helpless, and that we can change things. We can make better choices. And also, he adds that many emotions can be used skillfully, and there are a lot of positive emotions besides love, compassion, care, a feeling of empathy, a feeling of closeness, a feeling of joy, just being in the presence of another person, a feeling of being open to what the other person wants to communicate. A lot of times, just a glance can mean more than words. Just being in another person's presence. We can actually transform negative emotions when they arise too. So with meditation, we're creating a safe space for these emotions to arise, to be observed, examined, and to get to know them, to make friends with them, that we can see how they are generated, how they arise, how they stick around for a while, and then they're gone. And by doing this, we become less reactive to them. We have less impulse to follow them or to get away from them or to bury them or to bottle them up. When I worked in the prison, I would tell inmates, you've got a bottle of beer in your hand and you pop the top. Now you can drink it, you can stick your thumb on it and shake it up until it squirts out all over the place, or you could just take it and hold it upside down until the bottle is drained. Then we can look at our emotions that way. If we leave them alone, they will go away. They might come back 5 minutes later, but if we leave them alone, they will go away because they are fluid, they're not solid. And if we can let go of our fixation on them and get a deeper understanding of how our mind operates, it becomes very workable. We also can see that this is the human condition, that this is the way people operate when they don't know better, when they don't know how their own mind operates. And when we don't know, then we'll say, yes, she made me have this passion, or he made me angry, or whatever. We start blaming other people for our own emotions. So if we can sit quietly and let these rise and fall, we can get to know these emotions. We can see their insubstantial nature, that they are more fluid and that they disappear when they are left alone. With contemplation, we can see that they are detrimental, that they eat away at a healthy self-esteem. They eat away at the quality of our life and our relationships, that getting angry might make you feel better for a brief moment of time, but in the long run, it doesn't. And it can harm other people. And you're not happy when you are angry, even if you might feel some relief. So we can start seeing that we created them. And quote, if we stop making use of them, they don't exist. I'm going to say that again. This is on page 77 of my book. If we stop making use of them, they do not exist. All emotions, even the positive ones, are the same. So even love does not exist. It comes and it goes. And he goes into love in more depth. He says that love can be influenced by how a person was brought up, by the culture that they live in, by their life experience, and it can be a mix of selflessness and selfishness. It's very difficult to find in a pure state of selflessness. But if we apply, again, mindfulness and awareness, examine, look, we can gain insight into this process. We can see what other emotions are present, jealousy, for instance. We can see if we have insecurity related to this love. Again, we can get to know it much better, get to know ourselves much better. And of course, all of this is extremely beneficial. And he says that if we examine a particular emotion and find that it's not detrimental to you or others, if it has no connection to superiority or inferiority, I'm superior to the person that I'm in love with or having this relationship with. It has no element of self-condemnation, of powerlessness or isolation, then use the emotion. So it's good to kind of use this standard. And this is a pretty strong standard. And if you really examine deeply, you'll probably find an element of one or more of these things. And then be aware of it. Don't become a rock and say, well, I can't have any emotions at all. I have to stay away from people because I can't have this level of purity. On the other hand, if ego is present, there will be what he calls a poverty mentality. And it's important to remember that a poverty mentality is a feeling of, I need more, I'm lacking something, and I have to have it. And a healthy approach is contrary to this poverty mentality. It's developing our inner richness. It is considering others and developing an understanding of others, listening to others, wanting to hear others as much as you want them to hear you, perhaps even more. Usually, we want others to hear us. I overheard a conversation once that went between two co-workers. I told him, I don't understand why you don't understand me. And unfortunately, this is where we go when we get all wrapped up in our ego. So the next section he titles Interdependency. And basically what that means is everything inside, everything outside arises due to many, many causes and conditions. And in terms of relationships, it's really important to see how our emotions impact the relationship. Again, going back to the strategy, to see, are we using them strategically to reach a goal? How are we using them? It really helps then also to distinguish between emotions that are beneficial and those that are harmful. So clarity is really important in relationships, extremely important. With clarity, we can avoid excessive dependency on a partner, and we can see how motivation affects the relationship. And as we open up to the other person, we find that it will naturally lead to an increase in generosity, which means giving without the need of a specific outcome. And generosity can be just giving the other person a little more time to be with you, or giving yourself a little more time to be with your partner. Doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. Here is another quote. We develop a greater capacity to have a more fulfilling relationship with ourselves and others when we open up, when we have proper motivation, and when we become more generous. On the other hand, wanting to get our way leads to being enslaved by the other person, always wanting to control or possess the others. And it might seem like you are in control, but actually it is your desire to control the other person that is controlling you. Speaking of others, that it's important to care for others and to have unselfish relationships. whether it be in a close romantic type of relationship or really any kind of relationship. We are all capable of caring for ourselves, caring for our own interests, and being able to distinguish what is in our best interests and what is not in our best interests, what actually causes us harm. And we can put that then to use for other people. If we know how to care for ourselves, we can apply that to other people. Further on in the book, he talks about if we don't know how to care for ourselves, we really don't know how to care for other people. A lot of times people think, well, if I just care for everybody else, I'm doing what I'm supposed to as a good Buddhist or a good person, and then they don't care for themselves. And we need a mixture of both of those. So we need to maintain this awareness of the importance of being connected to ourselves, to others, and to the world, and that we need a balance with all of this. He goes on to say that there is a huge difference between excessive dependency and attachment and affection. And I'm going to add excessive attachment. When you're in a relationship with a person, of course, there's going to be some attachment. And of course, there's going to be some affection that's directed specifically at that other person. On the other hand, excessive attachment can narrow our perspective, narrow our world. It can limit affection. We need to cut excessive attachment and open up, let more people into our world. You might say, let the world into our world. So again, mindfulness and awareness is the antidote. Look inside, observe, learn about your attachment. Get to know yourself intimately. Make friends with yourself. And by doing that, life gets much easier. It really can reduce stress and all kinds of other problems that we create for our lives. When we see mistakes, makes this distinction. The best response when you see mistakes in yourself is to avoid guilt and self-condemnation. And this is very common. We can think, I'm not supposed to be doing this, and then I see this fault in myself. I'm a bad person. I feel guilty about it. This just makes things worse. It solidifies the mistake, and we start defining ourselves like that. It's like seeing a picture of a waterfall. Well, the waterfall is always moving. A picture doesn't move at all. That's what is meant by solidifying things. We think this is the way we are. There's no other way. There's no subtlety. We're the same at this moment as we were a year ago, 10 years ago. And then, of course, we get involved in blaming ourselves and then feeling, since we have been this way for such a long time, we're powerless, we're helpless, we're hopeless, and we develop all kinds of self-loathing. We do not want to go in that direction. Instead, we want to look at this self-knowledge as actually a great gift. Seeing our faults is something that is positive. This helps create the right conditions to change, and we want to change. And so we want to look at ourselves clearly, see our shortcomings, our mistakes, our flaws, but then do this with a mind of kindness, of a nurturing mind. Stay positive, realize that nobody is perfect. Quote, if we cannot have acceptance for ourselves, it will be hard to give allowances and accept others. We can say the same for any number of qualities. For love, if we can't love ourselves, how can we love others? If we can't be gentle with ourselves, how can we really be gentle with others? And on and on and on. Think about this with any quality. So self-knowledge is critical. We need to know where we are in order to know how to get to where we want to go. Try using GPS directions on your car if you don't tell it where you are. You just say where you want to go. I don't think it will work. So it's really important to realize this. I once wrote a poem and I included this idea of we need to be perfect. And I said, sunspots and flares, perfection unnecessary. The sun is what it is. We have to realize this, that we are who we are. We have Buddha nature. Yes, we do have some imperfections, but it's not a problem. It's workable. When we look at our shortcomings and focus on them, it just solidifies the negativities. It makes them less workable. We start defining ourselves by this and this alone. And this is actually very egocentric. We think that we excel in being bad. That's what ego wants, is for us to excel. Thinking things like I'm a terrible person makes it worse. I have used this example before. So let's say you have a weight problem and you want to lose some weight. If you spend all day looking in the mirror and telling yourself you're fat and ugly, how much weight do you think you're going to lose? Probably going to go to a refrigerator to get some solace. Keep this in mind. We need to have a positive outlook for ourselves, nurture ourselves, care for ourselves, love ourselves, and encourage ourselves to change. No matter how bad you feel about yourself and all the mistakes you've made and everything that you've done wrong, well, Milarepa killed 31 people. Have you killed 31 people yet? And I'm serious about this. Think about this. A lot of people think that on a scale of 1 to 10, they are a 1.5. You're probably not nearly that good at being bad as you are thinking you are. My guess is you're probably more like a 5 or a 6. So don't exaggerate your faults and your negativities. We all have Buddha nature, that we can become more like a loving mother caring for her child. When a child misbehaves, the mother helps the child learn. She gives the child a safe place for the child to learn. She nurtures the child, comforts the child, encourages, reassures. This is the approach that works in terms of going in new directions. He goes on from there to talk about how it's very common for people that deny they have faults to then see them in other people. He says this, and I highly recommend it, that if you see someone that has a fault and it kind of sets you off, that is the time to take a break and look inside and, do I ever act like this? Because frequently that's the problem. We don't like our faults when other people engage in them. Finally, accept your limitations. Don't be too demanding of yourself. Be more encouraging. Develop courage to look within. Develop courage to go in places and new directions that you haven't gone before. This is my own kind of summation of this. Be your own motivational book author. Become the author of your new life. The next section he titles Relationships. This is all in the same chapter. There's a lot in there, needless to say. He starts out by saying there's tremendous benefit from giving and receiving love. We can be dependent on someone and still have a successful relationship, but we don't have to have this strong attachment. Rather, we can bring mindfulness and awareness to the relationship, see how our attachment is influencing the relationship. We can then spot destructive tendencies before they become big problems. We can work with them. So seeing clearly is extremely important and beneficial if we can maintain this positive attitude and seek to change. I was married for 21 years, and I can tell you one of the problems in the marriage and why it fell apart was that I put the relationship on cruise control. And that's what he's talking about here. Don't put it on cruise control. Keep your mind open, investigate, apply mindfulness and awareness. Pay attention to what's happening. So be more responsive. Quote, the starting point of any relationship is to not treat the other person as one object among many, end quote. This allows more space and more freedom for both people. You have a relationship of interdependence rather than dependence. And this means that both people benefit. This also means that self-deception becomes workable, that you start seeing self-deception. And the relationship then slowly becomes less conditional. No matter where we are, even if we were out in the Boundary Waters canoe area by ourselves, camping, we're never alone. We realize that from birth to death, we are in relationships with the earth, with people, and it can't be any other way. If you're camping, well, where did the tent come from? If you made the tent, well, where did the material come from? Where did the knowledge to make a tent come from? And so on and so forth. What about the air you breathe? Well, it comes from plants soaking in carbon dioxide and breathing out oxygen. Where does the water come from? Well, it comes from the clouds, comes from streams, and so on and so forth. Wherever we are, whatever we do, we are not independent. We are in this relationship, and we depend on others. In so many ways, we depend on others. A very simple example would be now we're on Zoom. Well, there's a company named Zoom. They employ people that make this possible. All of us have digital devices to make this possible. Digital devices need electricity. There's this whole electric grid that we are plugged into to get our electricity, unless you are one of the few people that are self-sufficient in providing your own electricity. But then you need solar panels, batteries, wind generators, or all kinds of other things to produce your electricity, and somebody had to make them, and on and on and on and on. You just cannot say, I am separate. I'm not in this interdependent relationship with the earth, the environment, and everybody else. So it's very, very important to remember this. To continue, he talks about how our skills and strategies and relationships go right back to childhood, that we bring a lot with us from childhood. We bring with us expectations on the partner, and we have outside influences that have influenced our expectations. What is important for us is to have the right attitude towards the relationship and our partner, to remain flexible rather than rigid, to concentrate on what is most important, and to let go of the trivial. It's so easy to get hung up on the trivial. I had an interesting realization today. I had a scheduled visit from the heating contractor where they would do the yearly maintenance. The owner of the company called me up this morning and immediately started talking about the weather. And then he said, well, there's been a change. The man's going to come, but it's going to be later on in the day. Is that okay? And then, of course, I said yes. And he did come. But I realized to a heating contractor, the weather isn't trivial. When the repairman came, the maintenance man came, I told him this, and he said, yes, we had down to like 22 degrees this morning. And he said, the phone has been ringing off the wall, so to speak. And we're totally swamped with service calls. To a heating contractor, maybe talking about the weather isn't trivial. But if our furnace is working, maybe it is a little more trivial. So it's really helpful to be able to distinguish what is important, what is trivial, let go of the trivial. We need to be open to the other person, to see them freshly, to realize every person is unique and to see our own self-deception and to realize that it's workable. Quote, we can let a person reveal themselves to us rather than projecting a variety of attributes to them, end quote. When we solidify the other person with labels, they become static in our eyes. There's no movement, and we don't want movement. We want them to stay the same. Our minds are made up. And of course, this is totally unrealistic. I have a list of 5 unreasonable expectations in life. And so I'm going to bring up one here. This is not in the book, but this unrealistic expectation in life is others should live up to my expectations. And when we get into a relationship, we can add to that in the fine print. I shouldn't even need to tell my partner my expectations. They should know. Needless to say, that is a lack of communication and a recipe for failure. Here is a few lines from a poem. It's called Acceptance. Again, this isn't in the book. When I want more of you, I am truly in love with you. When I want you to be more, I'm in love with a dream. He then goes on and throws in a Western concept from sociology. He says, we live in an intersubjective world. So I had to go immediately to the note in the back of the book, and I'm going to read what that note says. This is a direct quote. A personally formulated view of oneself, one's ego or identity that one relates to as being permanent or fixed, to have its own reality, and one's perceptual commitment to the idea that their view of their fixed identity, who one believes oneself to be, is a view or perception that is shared by others. That's quite a mouthful. It sounds like it came from Buddhism, needless to say. So he then goes on to talk about egolessness. But Tralek Rinpoche likes to bring in elements from Western culture, Western science, and so forth to make a point. This does not agree with Tibetan Buddhism, or this does agree with Tibetan Buddhism. And sometimes he talks about misunderstandings of concepts and ideas in Buddhism. So what egolessness means is seeing ego as not real and not fixed. It doesn't mean that ego disappears. It's seeing that it is interdependent, it's fluid, it's fabricated, it's made out of parts, and it's changing. He talks about the poverty mentality, and that is that we're constantly grasping for solidity, for certainty, for security. And so we're constantly missing what we feel that we need. And of course, since we can never establish any of those, much less all of them, we have this poverty mentality of that we're just lacking and need. We feel that this protective mechanism is lacking, and then we try to organize the world so our ego feels secure. We view things through ego's eye and we misinterpret things, and on and on and on. We think that some things are more important than others, that the trivial things are incredibly important. He says that we actually would rather be deceived than see the truth. Ego is narcissistic. It's very filled up with itself. And the ego's idea of self-esteem is very distorted. It's unhealthy. It doesn't care about others. It's full of pride and arrogance. And we actually just plain lose touch with ourselves and who we really are. On the other hand, it's fabricated, meaning it's made out of interdependent parts. If we can see that this is what it really is, a device, we can work with it in a very skillful way. We can utilize our emotions in a more constructive way. From the ego's point of view, our emotions are useful to reconstruct, perpetuate. They're great for maintenance. But on the other end, they take us for a roller coaster ride, up and down, up and down. Can be thrilling, actually, going back to people that feel that falling in love is better than staying in love. But if we look closely, we see that ego is not static. It's constantly moving. It's constantly reconstructing itself. It constantly needs maintenance, and that we have created our own identity. And in fact, there's a saying that I hear from time to time. A person gets in a tough place, maybe with their job, and they say, I need to reinvent myself. And of course, what that means is that who they are is already an invention, because there's re in front of invent. And it's good to look at this, that we're actually an invention. Nothing wrong with that, but just realize you can reinvent yourself every moment. When we see this in ourselves, sometimes it can bring up resentment and guilt and other kinds of negative emotions. But if we look at resentment, it comes from a feeling impatient, powerless. We realize our limitations, and then we judge other people when we're in a situation with other people. When it's ourselves that we're resenting, I made an idiot of myself. I went to a dinner party and had a wonderful dinner. Then an hour later, I went to the bathroom and looked in the mirror, and I had spinach stuck between my upper teeth, and I've been smiling all night long. Oh, what do people think of me? Yeah, been there, done that maybe, or something like it. A man would be, their zipper was open. On and on and on. There's endless ways we can look at ourselves and resent what we have done. And then we can develop guilt based on that. Oh, I shouldn't have felt that way, yada, yada, yada. That's this inner critic. This is all self-deception. It's this ego, and we're completely misinterpreting the outer world and miss what's actually happening. He talks about we could even have an identity crisis. By the way, if that was you with the spinach between the teeth, it's humbling, and humility is good. Keep that in mind. What happens is that if things don't fit our preconception of the world, others, ourselves, we discard it. It doesn't fit. It's like election deniers. You can't convince them of anything. Their mind is totally solid. The election was stolen, yada, yada, yada. But we are like that too. Again, it's really easy to see our faults in other people. I have said, if seeing the faults of other people was spiritual, this country would probably be the most spiritual country in the world, because we're very good at seeing the faults of other people. So our faults, our misperceptions and misconceptions can become very detailed and very entrenched. So we need to have more mindfulness, more awareness, to have more clarity, more meditation. And all of this encourages spiritual growth. We can begin to understand ego, see its activities, begin to open up, perhaps even start laughing at our ego tricks, seeing our ego in action and realizing, I don't have to go there. Be glad to get to know yourself. Be relieved to open up and see this. He says that languishing over an issue doesn't accomplish anything positive. Instead of that, do some meditation. Allow the mind to settle. Investigate. See how self-deception works, how it arises, the process. Start to see these delusions and mix it with insight and self-knowledge. Basically, you're making friends with yourself. The struggle weakens, stress weakens, a lot of stuff just plain falls away. Greater freedom appears naturally, and we have a deeper connection with the world and others, especially ourselves. finally, here is another quote, the last quote I'm going to use. It is important to develop the discipline of paying attention to what we experience, conceptual about, and have repetitive thoughts about. End quote. This is very important in relationships. Outbursts of anger are not very helpful unless you apply a little bit of contemplation afterwards and see what's going on. Anger can drive people apart. You can actually be at war with yourselves, not at war with another person, but to have this inner battle going on inside. And meditation, contemplation, looking deeply, all of this helps us see more clearly and be able to understand what's going on inside.